It was an embarrassing night for the Buffalo Bills in preseason game number 2 in Chicago. What stood out, good and bad? We're going to break that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. The Bills got smoked 38-0, preseason game number 2, a loss to the Chicago Bears. And we're going to break down for you today what stood out from this performance. And look, I thought Jerry Ostrowski did a phenomenal job in our Bills Squad show, kind of breaking down where these teams were coming from going into this game. You have a Chicago Bears team. It's Caleb Williams, the number 1 pick from last year. It's his debut with Ben Johnson. Sunday Night Football in front of the home fans. They came into this game playing their starters. They wanted the reps, and surely they wanted to come in and play extremely well. And I'm not saying that the Bills didn't, right? The Bills came in, and I think the players that they chose to play probably did the best they could. But I think for the Bills, their preseason game number 2 happened on Friday during the joint practices, where that was the competitive session for them. And of course, I'm not going to say that Sean McDermott told the players to go out there and not compete and do their best, but they were certainly undermanned, especially earlier in the game going up against the Bears starters, and it didn't look very good. It was a sluggish performance by the Bills. And so I think there's some context necessary as you try to reconcile and understand what the heck happened on the field out in Chicago. And look, it's the preseason. I'm not really interested in conversations about game script or how individual units performed. There's no game planning. It's guys going out there trying to fulfill their individual assignments and make a football team. It's a lot different than, hey, we're game planning against a particular opponent. So it's never bad to play good, right? You always want your team to play well. But I also feel like there's a certain level of pump the brakes, take a deep breath, take it for what it is when you consider where the Bills were at entering this football game. All right, what I want to do is work through each position and tell you my prevailing thought coming out of this game at each spot. So we'll start offense, we'll work our way down to defense, and we'll have some special teams comments here at the end. At quarterback, I don't think either Mitch Trubisky or Mike White played particularly well. I will say that I continue to have a little bit more confidence in Trubisky running this offense compared to Mike White. Now, I recognize that Mike White's reps came against the Bears starting defense, which is an important layer to keep in mind. But I think Mike White is just very limited in terms of his movement skills. And when other teams want to dial up some pressure and force him to move off his spot and move within the pocket, the wheels come off. We remember this when he played for the Jets and the Bills teed off against Mike White. There's just some limitations. So if he can work in rhythm, if he can hit a 3-step drop or a 5-step drop and throw the football and everything is on schedule, I think he's going to be fine. But that's really not how the NFL works. And I think those physical limitations show up in ways that don't with Mitch Trubisky. I'm not trying to sell you on Mitch Trubisky as this ideal A-plus backup. I do think that he's a better option for the Bills compared to Mike White. And obviously, I think the Bills offense moved its best when Trubisky was in there. Obviously, the Bills didn't score. They didn't convert a third down the entire game. They're 0 for 8. They only had 180 yards of total offense on 10 drives. I mean, there's not a very good story to tell overall. But I think when Trubisky was in, at quarterback and they started to feature Frank Gore a little bit, that's when the offense actually looked like it had a pulse. And so I continue to believe that as we've now seen some preseason games, that Trubisky's the better player, and which is interesting when you foil that against what I said coming out of camp. I said, well, I think maybe Mike White's a tick better than Trubisky, but now think about the controlled environments, right? You can't hit a quarterback in practice. And I think that allows Mike White to run the offense more effectively. But when the live bullets start to fly and you need a little bit of physical upside, Trubisky offers that in ways that Mike White doesn't. So I think he's pulling ahead in this race. I think it was always predictively his to lose. And I remain more convinced than ever that Trubisky's probably going to be your QB2. At running back, Frank Gore, I think, is the story here. Obviously, he's really the only running back that played in this game. You had like 3 carries from Ray Davis. Ty Johnson and James Cook obviously didn't play. And Darrington Evans had a hamstring injury on Friday, or else I think he would have had a lot more opportunity in this game. But Frank Gore goes out there and has 81 yards on 12 touches. And those 81 yards accounted for 45% of the Bills' overall total yards on 12 touches. They ran 43 plays, and the guy on 12 touches accounted for 45% of the Bills' yards. Now, look, I think Frank Gore has been impressive this preseason going back to last week, and I think he was impressive last year during the preseason. I don't think there's a spot for him on this roster, but as a guy that you can get back on your practice squad that's one snap away from being on the active roster, I feel like you feel pretty decent about him. I think he's got a really natural feel for touching the football, whether that's as a receiver or as a runner. You know, he's not the biggest, he's not the most explosive, but he runs hard and he has a really good feel for navigating space. And it's my suspicion, and I'll need to confirm this when watching the film, that he had some really good pass protection reps as well. And so I think Frank Gore played well, but he fumbled, right? On the best drive that the Bills had, he fumbled, and it wasn't a situation where it's excusable. It's an open field. You know, he sees the contact coming and he coughs up the football. And so on a night where there's not a lot going for the Bills, you come away thinking, maybe Frank Gore is going to be the great story to tell from this game. Well, he has to toss a wet blanket over his own performance by fumbling when the Bills had their best opportunity to score. And so even when it went right for the Bills, it also went wrong. But when you take away the fumble, which you really can't, I thought it was a strong performance for Frank Gore. All right, coming up next, wide receivers. I've got thoughts about Elijah Moore, and Tyrell Shavers continues his hot preseason and training camp. We'll break that down here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You can get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. Having a trusted professional to talk things through with can help you cut through the noise and keep you focused on what matters most. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into your schedule. Just click connect, and you can even switch therapists anytime if you need to. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, the Bills got smoked 38-0. 31 first downs for the Bears, 12 for the Bills. Chicago goes 9 of 16 on third downs, 2 of 3 on fourth downs. The Bills go 0 of 10 combined on third and fourth down. The Bears have 528 yards of offense. The Bills have 180, and the Bears possess the ball for 20 minutes more than the Bills. Yikes! It's glad we're not talking about a regular season game, but that was really, really just a disaster of a performance by the Buffalo Bills. We'll continue our recap of this game, talking about what I'm thinking about most about each position group, and we're going to get into the wide receivers next, where I thought Tyrell Shavers was a bright spot for this team. Really continues to show his vertical route running, which is created by his really good work in his release packages to create that initial space. And then he's got this ability to kind of just run away a little bit. His vertical route running is very impressive. And you saw him make a nice catch on a back shoulder. You saw him draw a pass interference call down the field. He should have had another connection with Mike White. Mike White was just a tick long on a throw that should have been a deep completion. You can maybe give some criticism to Tyrell Shavers for looking back to the quarterback and maybe slowing up just a tick to throw that off. But bottom line is Tyrell Shavers, once again, making plays down the field and in position to make plays down the field. And his case for making this roster just continues to get stronger. And so shout out to Tyrell Shavers for being a bright spot when there wasn't a whole lot of bright spots from this game. The other player at receiver I wanted to discuss is Elijah Moore. I thought he had two drops, which is not great. And then he also misread the leverage on the block by Zach Davidson that was ultimately called a face mask by Zach Davidson, but he needs to get inside that block. I mean, it was just real as a really poor decision with the football and showing bad vision. And so I think that's what continues to frustrate me about Elijah Moore is I think when you isolate his skill set, whether it's the route running, it's the hands, it's the athletic profile, the quickness, and then you foil that against, applying that within the context of a football play, I think there's inconsistency, whether it's route pacing, reading coverage on the fly and adjusting, being consistent with fundamentals, reading the leverage of blocks correctly, right? There's just been some mistakes. And I am a little bit concerned that maybe some of the hype that we had for that signing might not materialize. Maybe it will. Obviously we've never seen him play in the preseason game or any game with Josh Allen within the structure of the Bills' actual offense in a game plan situation. But I will say, based on the opportunities he's had, it's not really been too impressive. So Elijah Moore not, I think, doing much here to get me excited entering the season outside of, hey, if I can isolate the skill set that I believe you to have, I do like it. But can that matter within the context of this Bills offense? That, to me, still remains to be seen. At tight end, I'm left thinking a lot about Zach Davidson and more mistakes. Had a couple of drops last week and then a couple of penalties this week and some costly penalties. Has the face mask penalty that put the Bills way back. Again, Elijah Moore misread the block, but that doesn't mean you have to pull the guy's face mask and get a big-time foul. And then he has the offensive pass interference that takes away a play down the field for Buffalo to Christian Wilkerson. So, for a guy that doesn't play very much to have a limited amount of time in 2 games and come away with 4 pretty big mistakes, it's not ideal. It's not ideal. And I'm curious to go back at the tape and kind of get a feel for Jackson Hawes and what the blocking was like, and if he got special teams reps this week, and did he definitively get reps before Zach Davidson? I want to find that out because we didn't really see him do much. I think he was targeted one time, and I don't think the pass was catchable. So quiet day for the tight ends. Kalecki Letu, I had an opportunity to catch a 3rd down pass. It was a little bit wide of the mark. You'd still like him to see him make the catch. So overall, a quiet day from the Bills tight ends. And to me, it's highlighted by 2 massive mistakes by Zach Davidson. When it comes to the offensive line, things that I'm interested to go back and watch the tape. I certainly want to see how individual players played, but what stands out from the live watch was guys getting reps in some different spots. Last week, Chase Lunt played right guard and left tackle. He played left guard and right tackle, if I'm not mistaken, in this game. We saw Kendrick Green get reps at center when that really didn't happen last week. And then Ryan Vandemark got reps at left tackle, which didn't happen last week. So you're seeing guys in some different spots, which I think is unfortunate because the reality is Alec Anderson, Cedric Van Pran-Granger, and Tylen Grable are part of this depth mix for the offensive line, and they continue to not be available to get reps during the preseason. And so I think that's costly time that they're missing. And I think the flip side of that is you're getting other guys that are getting chances to play in other spots. Some of that out of necessity, but that brings about opportunity, and you never know what's going to happen when guys have those chances, especially when other guys are on the shelf. So I like this pipeline of developing offensive line talent in Buffalo. I sure as heck wish we were seeing these guys play during the preseason, and now you're talking about, can they get ramped up and play this week against Tampa to get some film out there? Time will tell, but I don't feel good about some of those guys being able to come back, in particular Cedric Van Pran-Granger, who's been on the PUP list since the start of training camp with this calf deal. And where's he at? What's the deal here? Is this a lost season for him? Like, what's the situation? I just feel like that's completely under discussed, and we just don't have a ton of information on it. Let's start talking defense. Let's go to the defensive end position. Was hoping to see Landon Jackson and Javon Solomon do some things here that would get me excited. They didn't. Quiet day for both of them. And in fact, what I'm left thinking about is mistakes. Landon Jackson with a roughing the passer call. Javon Solomon jumps off sides. He takes a 3rd and 10, makes it a 3rd and 5. Now the Bills wind up getting off the ball, but you went from 3rd and long to 3rd and mid. Teams will sign up for 3rd and 5. They don't want 3rd and 10. So you can't go off sides there. And Javon Solomon did. Shout out to our guy, Michael Hoyt, gets a sack in this game. I think it's the only sack the Bills have had this preseason, if I'm not mistaken, in 2 games. I think Michael Hoyt, I don't think would normally play in a game like this, but because he's going to be suspended for 6 games, it's good to get him some run on the defense. It's good to see him make a play, and I'll be excited to go back and watch the tape on him and get more familiar with what he was able to do out there. At D tackle, of course, I'm interested in Deion Walker, TJ Sanders, Dwayne Carter, Zion Logue. Dwayne Carter on the called back scoop and score by Dwayne Carter really showed a strong rush there. TJ Sanders, I think, was a little bit more quiet in this game. I thought he had some run reps where I don't think he was in his fit. Zion Logue had a nice run stop, but there were some plays where I think he was moved off his spot. And then Dwayne Carter, I think, had some challenges defending the run, but he did blow up the screenplay. And it was nice to see the Bills be able to recognize the screenplay and not get gashed for a big gain. And so those are some players I'm anxious to go back and watch the tape. I mean, obviously, there's not a great story to tell with this Bills defense. I went through the numbers. They couldn't stop anything. And so that's probably a big indictment on how the front looked. And I'm anxious to kind of go back and see how those guys fared, but didn't feel them quite as much during the live watch like you did last week against the Giants. So the tape will reveal more of that, but a flashy moment from Walker, a flashy moment from Carter. I thought Sanders was a bit quiet. Logue had, again, a good run stop, and then at least one play where I thought he was pretty blown off the ball. So mixed bag, but overall defensively not good enough, and that usually starts with your defensive line. All right, we'll talk back 7. I know there's a lot of conversation about the safeties, so we'll talk about that and more here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. Fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year I'm playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've used Yahoo Fantasy for years, and I love how smooth the draft day experience is. Our league's been running through Yahoo for a while. It's easy to set it up. The mobile app is awesome, and the message boards are so fun for the smack talk. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play Yahoo Fantasy football, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season right around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, let's talk about the defensive back 7 and special teams to close out this podcast. At linebacker, I think you saw the limitations of Joe Andreessen. You love him as a downhill player, a take-on player, a run defender. But when you ask him to cover, it gets dicey, right? This is not a guy that's going to be very strong in cover 2 and covering that deep middle. He's not going to be able to really carry routes down the field. And look, you're going up against a Ben Johnson offense, and Ben Johnson offenses are about slot receivers, tight ends, and running backs. And I thought that was very exposing for Joe Andreessen and his limitations as a coverage player. It was good to see Dorian Williams back on the field in this game, but I think the reality of the Bills' depth at linebacker is you have Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano as your starters. Your first in for Bernard is Joe Andreessen. Your first in for Matt Milano is Dorian Williams. And I don't think either player can really play the other spot. And so I said this on Bill's squad, but that gets me really interested in Shaq Thompson. I thought he was really good before he went down with a hamstring injury as a guy that can play both spots, that can also cover, a guy that's played in the system, a guy that's comfortable wearing the green dot helmet and being the signal caller in the defense. And so I know he's a little out of sight, out of mind. I know that wrong side of 30, a couple of big injuries the last 2 years. But I do find myself curious about how he fits into this landscape and if he can elevate maybe what the Bills have if needed to rely on some depth at linebacker for an extended stretch this season. At corner, look, the Bills obviously didn't defend the pass very well. They gave up 357 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. It felt like the Bears could throw the ball wherever they wanted to. Well, I'll say this, when you're not being very effective, like with your front and your safeties and linebackers are having blunders, it's going to be hard to play good complementary team defense. And so I think you saw a lot of corner struggle, in particular Dane Jackson, and not being able to carry routes as long as he needs to. But I have a hard time, right now off of a live watch going in hard on any corner as saying they were really good or they were really bad. I think the Bills are really undermanned at corner, and I don't think collectively they played good enough defense to really feel like, based on a live watch, we know how these guys did. But I do think you can point to a guy like Dane Jackson and feel like there were some struggles out there. At safety, I know that this has been a big talking point. Cole Bishop back on the field for this game. Sean McDermott said he was on a rep count. Remember, he's missed like the last 3 weeks. Then he practiced on Friday in the joint session, and then he played a handful of snaps in this game. And they were eventful. He had one good open field tackle. He had another missed tackle. And on the touchdown pass to Lamide Zaccheaus, he got twisted up in man coverage. So it was mostly bad for Cole Bishop. And we continue to just not really know where he's at. And he's under rep, right? Sean McDermott has made that very clear that he needs more time. And obviously it's been mostly discouraging, right? I understand if you're concerned about Cole Bishop, he's giving you that reason, whether it's been lack of impact when he's on the field or the availability concerns that's kept him, out of practices and putting him in his position to be behind. I understand being concerned there. I don't understand writing the guy's career at this point, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity left for him to prove what he's going to be, but it's certainly at this point, you don't feel too good about that. DeMar Hamlin has to play in this game again. You saw, some of the challenges that he has. A guy that is a depth player. I think there's a lot of criticism for DeMar Hamlin, and we have to remember what the reality is. This is a late day 3 pick that was re-signed on a 1-year deal and is the 64th highest paid safety in the NFL. Stop expecting him to be more than a reserve. That's what he is for this team. And unfortunately, the Bills' plans to continue to replace him are not panning out, whether that's Mike Edwards or Derek Forrest, who's been completely a nothing burger so far this preseason and training camp. I'm curious to see if it really came down to it, where does Cam Lewis factor in? If the Bills had to play games without Bishop or Rapp, should we be thinking more about Cam Lewis as potentially a guy that's going to get some run back there? I'm fascinated to find out, but I will say the same thing. When your linebackers are a mess in coverage, you're not getting much rush. Your safety's not really going to be in position to play good ball. And I understand being concerned. I do. But I also kind of want to see this play out and really know what the Bills have in Cole Bishop and what that looks like with Taylor Rapp next to him. And I think that Taylor Rapp's obviously the key piece at safety, and he didn't play in this game. So I think we have a lot to learn, but I certainly understand being discouraged. If there was a bright spot defensively, it's Jordan Hancock. Had a really good run fill on a safety blitz. You could feel his presence once again, physical, running around, played safety early in the game. And then when the Bills had an injury to, I forgot who it was. Somebody in the slot. Name escapes me right now. He winds up having to play a lot more in the slot, and then he got injured. So the Bills came out with, I think, Codrington in the slot initially, and then they played Hancock in the slot, and then he got hurt, and then the Bills wind up starting to go back to like a base defense type situation, and the game was kind of out of hand. But Hancock, I thought, was a bright spot for this team, and of course, he injures his shoulder. He said he was fine after the game, but we'll see what Sean McDermott says about that next time he meets with the media. Real quick on special teams, I thought Brad Robbins was perfectly fine, if not pretty good. Had a 52-yard net punt. That was a fair catch. Had a 62-yard punt. That was a 60-yard net. Those are two fantastic punts. He had a couple inside the 20. He had one touchback, but it was kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, an end of half type situation where you kind of live with the touchback. So I thought Brad Robbins continues to be serviceable, like at least serviceable, maybe even a decent punter. So I was concerned there, but I'm finding myself less and less concerned about Brad Robbins. Caden Davis came in for one field goal. He missed it, 56 yards, kind of a sudden change situation. I think it would have been awesome for him if he made the field goal, but it's kind of an understandable miss coming in cold in a weird situation where you're probably not expecting to have to kick. He came in and missed the 56-yarder. I think it was wide right, but his opening kickoff was phenomenal. If you can get that ball to land in the landing zone and then roll into the end zone, that returner has to bring it out. And you saw the Bills tackle the returner, was it at the 4-yard line? They had to go 96 yards to score. Now they did, but in normal circumstances, you feel pretty good about that type of kickoff. So the kickoff was good, but of course he misses the field goal. Real quick on the return game, you saw Laviska Shenault, Brandon Codrington, KG Hamler, and Elijah Moore get return chances, kick return chances. What's notable to me there is Elijah Moore got a rep because I think that would be helpful. If he can help you in that capacity, that'd be a useful part of his role, because I don't know that it's going to be overly prominent in the offense. I think he's the backup to Khalil Shakir. And short of Khalil Shakir not being available, like where do the reps come for Elijah Moore? Maybe certain groupings, it will make sense. But if your 11 personnel is Palmer, Coleman, and Shakir, you don't really run 10. It's going to be hard to find those reps for Elijah Moore. So if he can find some work in the return game, that would be helpful. I do find it notable that the only guy to get a punt return rep was Brandon Codrington. He got 2 chances. One he returned, I think, for 12 yards. One he let bounce and it went for a touchback. And so if the Bills were truly interested in somebody else being the punt returner, you'd think they'd get some opportunities to do it. Now, I know that they only had 2 chances to do a punt return in this game, but both went to Brandon Codrington, who was the guy that handled that job up until the playoffs last year. So maybe Brandon Codrington is going to claim this. And there's also this part of me that maybe it's just going to be Khalil Shakir and the kick return is going to be Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. So I can see both things playing out. But to me, with Brandon Codrington being the only guy to get a punt return chance in this game, leads me to believe that he's the only serious contender for the job. All right, folks. 38-0. The worst preseason loss in at least the last 50 years. That information courtesy of Thad Brown on his X account. We'll talk some more about it in the All-22 review. We'll get to herd mentality. The Bills have one more preseason game this coming weekend against Tampa Bay, and then we're on to Baltimore. So we're getting there, but we got a few more hurdles to clear. That could do it for us here today on the podcast. As always, I thank you for being here, and I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills! And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.